The first UFC tournaments were real fights without rules. In the cage, steroid mutants and martial arts enthusiasts from the outskirts would clash, with the roar of the crowd resembling the growl of wild beasts. Fighters could battle for half an hour without a break. It was an era when the UFC resembled an underground berserker club more than a sports organization. Watching modern champions turn their noses up at fights and complain about payouts exceeding $1 million, one can't help but look back at the early days when everything was just beginning. Fighters would face off whenever and against whoever was available, and often the prize for battered health, broken limbs, and gaping wounds was a case of beer. Of course, this is somewhat exaggerated, viewed through the lens of nostalgia. In the first UFC tournaments, fighters competed without gloves and had only two rules to follow: no biting and no eye gouging. Everything else was allowed, though unsportsmanlike conduct was tacitly frowned upon by most fighters, who adhered to a sense of corporate solidarity and rarely resorted to dirty tactics. There were exceptions, of course. For instance, an American skinhead made an impression on the audience when, from a dominant position, he began mercilessly attacking his opponent. Watching these scenes was painful for any man, yet South Korean fighter Bate Johnson endured the blows and finished the fight. Incidentally, Johnson is currently serving a life sentence for gang rape. Traditionally, each tournament featured 8 fighters who began their journey toward the championship title in the quarterfinals. One unique aspect of the early UFC was that the entire tournament took place in one evening, with fighters often having little time to recover between matches. The record holder in this regard was Brazilian Royce Gracie, who triumphed in multiple bouts in a single tournament. Today, when fighters prepare for a single fight for half a year, this seems unimaginable. Another feature of early UFC tournaments was the absence of weight classes, leading to matchups like a 400-pound sumo wrestler against a much smaller but more agile opponent. These mismatches became fan favorites, such as during a special David versus Goliath tournament that pitted fighters of vastly different sizes against each other. The first UFC tournament was held in 1993 in Denver, featuring 8 fighters, each representing a specific martial arts discipline: boxing, wrestling, kickboxing, taekwondo, and even sumo. The goal was to determine which fighting style was the best. Royce Gracie, representing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, emerged victorious despite his modest physique, winning all his matches with submission holds. At the time, most fighters lacked grappling skills and were helpless against Gracie's techniques. Gracie went on to win 2 more tournaments, UFC 2 and UFC 4, but in 1995, the 3-time champion unexpectedly left the organization, citing disagreements with the UFC's direction. However, rumors suggested he was intimidated by the growing competition. In 2006, Gracie returned for UFC 60, tarnishing his undefeated record with a loss via TKO to Matt Hughes. By 1995, after 4 tournaments, the UFC faced serious challenges in organizing fights. They introduced new rules, including a 30-minute time limit, as early matches had no set duration, ending only with a knockout or a fighter's surrender. They also established the concept of title fights, addressing issues like unexpected champions emerging due to injured opponents. The introduction of belts marked the beginning of a shift toward more structured competitions. For Russian fans, UFC 5 was memorable for the debut of Oleg Taktarov, a sambo master who reached the semifinals but lost to Dan Severn. Taktarov's resilience and unorthodox style made him a fan favorite. He later won a tournament but never captured the title in a championship bout. After a series of battles, Taktarov left the UFC to pursue opportunities in Japan. The late 90s saw the rise of iconic fighters like Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, and Don Frye, whose charismatic personalities and unique fighting styles helped elevate the sport. However, the increasing violence attracted criticism, most notably from Senator John McCain, who launched a campaign against human cockfighting. This led to tighter regulations, including mandatory gloves, weight classes, and bans on particularly brutal techniques. These changes transformed the UFC into a legitimate sport. By the early 2000s, it had gained mainstream appeal, attracting a diverse audience. The addition of a women's division further expanded its popularity. Today's fighters enjoy the benefits of modern sports science, with medical teams ensuring their safety. Yet the early UFC tournaments remain legendary among fans, embodying a raw and untamed era of combat sports.